Here we are at the 50th anniversary, 50 years after Valley Stream South Junior Senior High School came into existence, and it's hard to believe that anyone involved in its creation could possibly have pictured all that it has become to nearly 10,000 people. What board member who ratified the proposal for the formation of the new school could possibly have known what sort of community he had breathed life into? What voter who authorized the $2.8 million expenditure for the construction and furnishing of South could possibly have realized how many times over that sum would repay itself? What architect, whose sketch later became a blueprint, whose blueprint later became South High School, could possibly have imagined how much more than a building he had just designed? Who could have known? Valley Stream, circa 1950, a burgeoning post-war suburban community. Despite the opening of Memorial Junior High School, Central High School's overcrowding problem continued to worsen. At the August 1950 meeting of the Board of Education, the motion was carried for the construction of two new schools, North and South. After community approval was finally attained 3 years later, the Reisert Farm and several acres of adjoining land became the location of South High School. At a cost of $2.8 million, the project began in earnest in September of 1954. From tabletop model to totally modern structure, South High School was almost a year in the making. The first priority was laying the pipelines that would supply the building with water. Massive cranes were employed throughout September and October of 1954 to lift, align, and position them under the ground. Next, the solid foundation that is essential to any learning institution was laid. By January, much of the steel support structure was complete, and by February, a good portion of the brick masonry had been added. As March and April of '55 came to pass, the exterior of the building was practically completed. However, work inside on the corridors and classrooms took significantly longer than planned, and it was not until the end of November that the engineers declared the project officially complete. South High School was ready for opening day, and only several short weeks later, that day arrived. December 19th, 1955, Valley Stream South Junior Senior High School opened its doors for the first time to the 850 students and 45 teachers who would be its original occupants.
To walk into a spanking new building was very modern for its time, the architecture. It was an open courtyard in the middle and, the building raised off the ground so you could walk right through into the courtyard.
Construction delays forced South's opening to be postponed for 4 months from the start of the school year, and the 7th through 10th graders who were to be its students spent that time on a split-session schedule at Central High School.
It was a very special year. We spent half the year at Central High School, and then when South was ready, we moved over there.
It was much easier because at Central we were sharing with the Central School, and every department had to share rooms, books, and everything else.
The opening day was anything but smooth.
It was just a busy day, the first day anyhow. After the first day, things didn't settle down too much. Everything was new. You didn't know where anything was. So you kind of had to familiarize yourself with the entire building.
The students did not take long to grow accustomed to their new home.
The students seemed to take it in better stride, I think, than some of the teachers. But all in all, I think it was a very smooth transfer.
Although they didn't know it at the time, South's first classes had a role in establishing so many of the traditions and precedents that remain with us today.
I guess you didn't have to follow in anybody's footsteps, that's for sure. There was just this whole feeling that we were starting things, sort of, the teams and all of that. Everything was brand new and fresh, Wasn't last year's recycled stuff. And that was nice. That was nice.
Currently led by Dr. Stephen Lando, Mr. Greg Peddle, and Miss Loy Tintella, South through the years has had a diverse group of administrators charting its course. Many of its leaders have come to be known as true pillars of excellence in school administration, and most have added their personal fingerprints to make South the school it is today. Few will argue that the most formative influence came from the first principal, J. James Bergen, who began his principalship while the 1955 to 1956 school year began at Central High School.
Mr. Bergen was a white-haired gentleman, very fatherly, very much Mr. Bergen. When he walked the halls, you had a sense that you were in the presence of someone very important.
Sometimes I could feel his presence standing outside my room. Not to scold me or something, but to watch. It was a sort of a special thing.
Mr. Bergen was careful to make sure that discipline was maintained at all times.
Mr. Bergen had a reputation for being very strict. It's not that he was sour or anything like that, but, you know, he meant business. If you had to go see him about something, it wasn't going to be a fun time, that was for sure.
Bergen often used rather interesting tactics to get his point across.
And the Yankees won the World Series, but this seventh game I wanted to watch. And I took the day off. I called in sick. I said, I'm not going in. I'm sick. So, get a pass, walk down to the office. I opened up the door. There must have been about 25 kids there. He called everybody in who was sick the seventh day of the World Series and made us all sit down. And we had to tell him what was wrong with us, why we couldn't come to school. Let me tell you, that was something. That was really, really something.
Mr. Bergen had a number of skilled assistants during his years at South. Among the earliest, Frederick Buddy made quite an impression on all.
How are we doing today, folks? He'd walk up and down the aisles of the school, and if he saw a teacher, he'd say, how are we doing, folks? And the same thing went to the students.
Mr. Buddy achieved his goals while at the same time gaining the respect of everyone.
Fred Buddy was, again, very special, warm, very laid back, never got excited. Somehow he managed some rough kids, but he did it with a very low-key way.
Mr. Buddy was the assistant principal, and he had a lot of I think he had a lot of interaction with the students, and he really was a buddy. I mean, he was a very you always remember him smiling.
And none of us ever spelled the word principal, as in you have your principals, or principal as the head of the school, incorrectly, because we had a wonderful little saying. The principal is our pal, the assistant principal is our buddy.
While Mr. Buddy was known for carrying the spirit of the school, John Sikes was clearly the dean of discipline.
There was one guy you didn't want to see, Mr. Sikes, who was the disciplinarian. As long as you weren't in Mr. Sikes' office, you were doing pretty well. And thankfully I wasn't there too often. He was a very distinguished guy. He had a posture that just carried him through the halls in a very distinct manner. You knew you were in trouble when he looked at you for more than 3 or 4 seconds.
Mr. Sikes inspires dread in some of his former students to this day.
I feared that man.
If you got a pass to go to Mr. Sikes, you trembled. You know, no one wanted to go to Mr. Sikes' office. You were in trouble if you went to Mr. Sikes. And he was kind of infamous.
J. James Bergen led South High School for the first 22 years of its history, and those who have followed him in the principal's office have had a similarly long length of service. The first was Dr. Steve Goldberg. Dr. Goldberg had the difficult task of following a legend, but instead of trying to fill Mr. Bergen's shoes, opted to bring a personal touch to the position.
Oh, he was a nice guy. He was always smiling. He was very friendly. Kids liked him.
And he basically kept a low profile. He was out of the limelight. There wasn't really any major problems with the students. It was like a very big, happy family, and you would see him waving to children and everybody down the hallway.
Dr. Goldberg involved himself in a large number of South activities.
Dr. Goldberg was the only principal who accompanied us on our hikes up Mount Washington, tallest peak in New England.
After Dr. Goldberg was promoted to the assistant superintendent's office, Miss Christine Cutting took hold of the reins. Miss Cutting had a long history at South before becoming its principal.
Miss Cutting, I hired Miss Cutting as a teacher, and she taught a lot of the junior high classes. Gradually, she went into the AP Bio, and when I left, she became chairman of the science department. And then she went over to North as assistant principal, came back to South as principal.
Miss Cutting left no doubt as to who was in control.
She was strict. She came in and she just completely got rid of the National Cut Day that supposedly, was in existence back in the day.
We emphasized the fact that, frankly, there are certain basic rules and regulations. I don't think discipline should be a surprise. I think students should know what's expected of them and that we have high expectations of our students, and rightfully so, because they're very good people.
And Miss Cutting, forget it. She was like, forget it. You just couldn't mess with Miss Cutting.
Oh, Miss Cutting, she was the supreme superlative head of state. She had everything under control. She commanded respect. The kids and the teachers were afraid of her. When she walked down the hall and you could hear that step, everybody scattered like flies.
You felt her energy. You just knew she was coming down. I used to get, I knew she was coming down.
As talented as Miss Cutting was, she notes that it was the assistance of her colleagues that made the difficult job of running a school feasible.
Right at the top of the list would have to be Mr. Peddle and Mr. Kaplan. I can't imagine running this school without having had the collegiality and collaboration of those two men. We put it all on the table. We solved complicated problems. We dealt with complicated issues. And each of us brought a different dimension to the table.
The students viewed Mr. Kaplan and Mr. Peddle as both stern disciplinarians and kindly mentors.
We had Mr. Kaplan and Mr. Peddle. Those were our two assistant principals, and they were wonderful guys.
I remember Mr. Kaplan and Mr. Peddle were the guys you had to see when you got in trouble. Thankfully, we didn't run into that too much.
Mr. Peddle, very strict. He was the police officer. He was the state trooper that pulled you over on the side of the highway, asked you a million questions. He should have been an FBI agent. Great man, but he liked to get into the nitty-gritty.
When Christine Cutting stepped down after 32 years of service, 15 as principal, Dr. Stephen Lando became South's fourth principal.
I remember that when Dr. Lando came, that was right after Miss Cutting. I remember some of his speeches.
My principal for the entire 6 years out here was Dr. Lando. He came in with us in 7th grade, and he's been a good principal.
Dr. Lando credits his staff and the South community for many of the school's recent successes.
I get to be someone that enables other people to perform exceptionally well. Staff members and students come with great ideas all the time, and truly being someone that facilitates great work among the students, staff, and parents of the community, that's what I'm most proud of, that I can be a part of that.
Through a combination of great leadership, innovative ideas, and genuine caring, the principals and their assistants have helped to make South what it is today. By far, one of South's most valuable commodities was its faculty.
I think the teachers at South were very good. I think that we were very close. I think it was a different era than it is today. And if I ever had a problem in South, the teachers were always there to help me.
Just somebody who can make an impact on your life. And if you needed advice, and these teachers were always willing to help me.
South teachers were more than just mentors.
I think the most significant thing was the friendships, the bonds that were created in terms of also not only student to student, but a lot of caring from the teachers. It was a lot more intimate.
They're all good teachers, because of what I found, those teachers really cared. They took an interest in the students, and they became good mentors for you. And we loved the teachers and we respected them.
I had people that believed in me and that empowered me. And I think that something like that will help me in this job as well, because if I believe in other people and show kids that I believe in them, maybe they'll rise up to the occasion and perform better.
The teachers themselves were quite close.
And we were a very cohesive group. So it was a lot of fun being a South High teacher. You could go down to the cafeteria. You could sit at one table, and there would be a political discussion about Israel. You could go to another table, and they would be talking about the opera they attended the night before. You would go to another table, and you would sit with a teacher, a social studies teacher, beloved by all of us, Dennis Kiley, who was always talking students. And I learned a lot from him.
After 50 years, it's hard to recall everything that did happen. And all I can say is, if the faculty at South today had the opportunities and the friendliness, the camaraderie that we had at the beginning of South, then they should be very thankful.
While it's difficult to encapsulate the history of South's teachers into a few names, there were several who truly left a legacy at this school. The science teacher Irving Safran is remembered for consistently holding his students to a higher scholastic standard.
He was an excellent teacher. He taught us like we were in college.
The most marvelous teacher I have ever had in my life. In fact, when I went to Hofstra in my senior year, I took biology, and I used his notes.
Some teachers who have gone down in South history still remain here to this day. Miss Melissa Hertel of the English department is just one example.
She was awesome. Awesome, fun, energetic. She sticks out of my mind too. She was a great teacher. She did an awesome job with the events with the school. She was always a photographer with a student at all the sports events, all the activities and everything.
Booker Gibson, a longtime member of South's music and performing arts departments, was a legend in his own right.
My love of music, my appreciation of music, my reference to the simplest three-note, I can name that opera in 3 notes because of Mr. Gibson, who I can see out of the corner of my eye.
He made classical music fun. He made it interesting. He was a great pianist, and for his class that most students really didn't want to take, he made it interesting, made it worthwhile to go to.
Booker Gibson was a wonderful teacher too. We still enjoy seeing him.
He got me into music. I became a professional musician, a jazz singer, and he was kicked the ball. He taught us. He used to tell us the stories of the operas. He'd give us the narrative, and then he would give us 8 bars of opera melodies.
They learned a lot. That's the key. If they still talk about things they learned in my class, I'm happy with that.
Both colleagues and former students agree that Miss Nancy Ramore's style of teaching set her apart from her peers.
She was really a very good educator. She really had passion for what she did.
She was always the teacher that saw me in the hallway or walked past my locker and said, hey, you need help in this, you need help in that.
Teenagers were going through things that I felt I could help with. I felt they needed a role model. I felt they needed parameters. And so I thought that I could do that job too.
She was very tough on me. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that it's because she cared. She wanted me to do well. She wasn't trying to break me down. She wasn't trying to make me feel bad. She just wanted me to maximize my potential. And that's something that I didn't really realize when I was here.
Mathematics teacher Miss Vogel left students with lasting memories and a supply of chalk dust as well.
Ms. Vogel was a math teacher. She was the one that if you didn't do your homework, you were there till 4:30, 5 o'clock. She didn't mind how late you stayed to do the homework. You were there. And if you interrupted her in the middle of class, she used to throw an eraser across the board. I remember going home and my mother would do laundry and be like, what is all this chalk on your sweater? What is all this chalk on your jeans? I'd say, Miss Vogel.
Miss Vogel, she had a problem with throwing the erasers, but she was a very interesting character. And she used to be straight up with you. Like, if you were going to college, you weren't going to college. She was great teacher.
Students also have fond recollections of 2 teachers of fine and performing arts.
My favorite teacher, perhaps, was Vincent Tampio, who was in charge of drama. It was perhaps the first time we were treated as professionals. He made us work the way that he would make anyone in a professional theater. I know I learned more from him than from anyone else I ever worked with.
You know, we always had a great time in band with Mr. Holly. We used to do some funny things in band. Those are some more stories that he'd probably rather not have us tell right now.
He was my band teacher for the entire 6 years I was here at South, and we did some pretty interesting things over the last 6 years.
Returning to South only 4 years after graduating, Mr. Jim Murray also was quick to make an impression.
I always liked Mr. Murray. He was one of my Spanish teachers. He was also our grade advisor. I mean, he was phenomenal. Just a great guy.
Yeah, Mr. Murray, awesome guy. I had Mr. Murray 2 years. I got 95s all the time. Great guy. He was a great teacher. He was your friend. He made it fun where you wanted to learn. You wanted to be involved in his activities.
Some South teachers also had a great influence on their colleagues.
For years I worked with Mr. Franza, who just retired, and he was the consummate showman. You knew when you went into his class that he was going to be funny and entertaining, and he was the same way with us.
I was very close with Mrs. Leszewski. She was a math teacher, and very good relationship with her. And when I came back as a teacher, she was still there teaching, and we had, even a good time really continuing our friendship now on a different level. And but yeah, she was a really very difficult, tough teacher. From day one, our class was behind. We were weeks behind, and we were reminded of it every single day. That was just her way of getting us through the material.
Former band director here, the first man, Bob Least. He was a big influence on my life, I'd say, when I first got here. Yeah.
Mary Ann Christie, of course, who was a chair before Mr. Franza. She was a great curriculum person. If you were ever stuck with an idea, how can I present Macbeth? How can I start the unit? She always had great ideas, and she always had good advice if you had difficulty handling a student.
One thing is clear. The teachers agreed that teaching in general and teaching at South in particular was an opportunity they could not pass up.
And I think that being a teacher is probably one of the best professions you could ever choose, because the rewards are incredible.
Just a lot of fun to work here. Great relationship between the faculty as well. The teachers got along like a family, and the students were part of that family. It was just a great environment in which to work and go to school and play.
Valley Stream South High School was about far more than academics, and this was extremely evident in the afternoon hours. South has offered a number of clubs and activities to augment the learning experience. The science clubs were often extensions of the classroom. One such example is the chemistry club.
I remember going there that night. It was cool. We were just, mixing solutions, chopping things up, putting them in petri dishes, just lighting fires, igniters.
Foreign exchange programs made a world of difference to some South students.
We did have an exchange student program, and I was the exchange student who went to another country. I went to India. That was probably the most memorable thing about being at South for me, because it changed my life in so many ways.
The language department offered trips to many exotic locales as part of the multicultural experience.
We went to Florence, Rome, Venice, and small town Italy, and it was just phenomenal just to be able to see another country with people that were your best friends, and the teachers were great to us.
We designed our own tour completely, and so our students saw some things that regular tour people never get the chance to see.
Some clubs were devoted to the hobbies of South students.
Art Smith and I ran the ski club for a while. We had a ski club here that went on for quite a few years, and we took kids on day trips.
Well, the computer club was near and dear to me. I had started that when I was teaching computers up on the 3rd floor, and at one point we had 10% of the school population in that club.
In South's early years, fraternities and sororities were recognized as extracurricular activities.
There was Omega Gamma Delta, Kappa Delta Nu, there was the Jewish fraternity of Mu Sigma, and it was an interesting concept because once you're involved with a fraternity and or a sorority, you had colors, as bizarre as that may sound.
They were clubs for the girls. Mine was Pi Delta Rho. We wore dark gray sweaters with pink trim.
It was Omega Gamma Delta and Phi Delta Kappa. I think they were yellow and black and red and black. And then they had their sister fraternities.
It was more of a friendship type of thing. The big deal with those fraternities is that if you pledged, they'd make you do silly things. You had to wear all kinds of silly clothes. You had to have a toothbrush with a string rolled around on it.
By the late 1960s, the school was moving toward more inclusive activities and stopped officially recognizing fraternities and sororities. Some of these activities included journalistic endeavors, newspapers, yearbooks, and even television.
Yearbook was a lot of fun, and one of the nicest things about working on the yearbook was that you got to help create the product that ultimately would, your class would be remembered by. I also did Southern Bell school newspaper.
The Falcon Report. It truly was a memorable experience, and it'll be an experience I'll never be able to forget. The Falcon Report is a weekly television news program. We ran it on Fridays, and we still run it on Fridays, as of now, I think. The Falcon Report is student-run, student-produced, and it really is truly about the students of South High School. And the entire school truly, I think, enjoys it. It's the one time, I think, during the entire week that the entire South community has one thing that they're all involved with at any single time. And I think that is the Falcon Report on Fridays.
South has had quite a history in theatrical and performing arts. Predecessors of the current Kickline squad, the Coulettes made appearances at sporting events.
The coach's name was Mr. Callahan, and the defensive unit of the football team was known as Callahan's Coolies. So we were the Coulettes.
We had pom-poms and little skirts, and we used to do kick routines and dances.
It was probably the early stages of hip-hop. More than cheerleading, it was about dancing and, routines where a bunch of girls would come together and almost create a routine that was uniform, like we would all move in sync.
With its chorus, orchestra, and band activities, South has helped to foster a greater appreciation for music in its students.
Music was one of the few departments that were involved in yearly district-wide festivals, which was kind of nice because it incorporated the best students from the 3 high schools. The quality of music was excellent then.
Alumni over the years have commented on the variety of dramatic plays and musicals offered by the Performing Arts Department.
We did have plays. We had the Theater Guild, and they put on some nice plays. They really did, and people were very, very good.
The kids came to me my very, very first year, and they were very upset that they were a senior high productions and not ones for the junior high. So they came to me and asked me, Mr. Murray, can you help us out? Can you do something about that? and I wasn't expecting to get the job. I wasn't looking for, responsibility like that. But I did it for 9 years.
My senior theatrical show, Once Upon a Mattress, in 1976-77, we had a blast. And I think that's what comes from working with a team of people who are devoted to drama and devoted to music.
Even the teachers got in on the fun in student-faculty performances.
South Pacific was the first one I participated in, and the role that I had was a goofy kind of character named Stu Pot. And the kids in the cast, I remember, they were just quite surprised that I wasn't always this stern assistant principal.
The head of the show was Mr. Franza wearing a grass skirt and doing this sort of Hawaiian-type dance on stage. The kids loved it.
Class councils provided opportunities for bonding that were cherished by students and teachers alike.
Class of 77, they're like my children.
My favorite of all things that I did was the class of 2000. I was class advisor for them from 7th grade all the way up to 12th grade. I did it on my own, had no desire to work with anybody else on them because they were my class.
Our prom, actually, we did something called like an after prom extravaganza out in the Hamptons. And the next day after the prom, Mr. Murray and some of the grade advisors, the officers of the grade worked pretty hard to get a dealership to help us out, and it was kind of like an incentive for kids to stay around, and it just worked perfectly. And we just raffled a brand new car off, and to tell you the honest truth, I don't remember who won. I know it wasn't me who won it, but
We actually fundraised enough money to purchase a car and raffle off a car at the end of the post-prom experience. So as to keep the kids off the streets and drug and alcohol free for the prom weekend. So I think it was pretty successful.
It was just a great thing that somebody like Mr. Murray would go to such lengths to make it special. And again, it's something you just don't forget.
A number of school events colored the day-to-day existence of South students. Dances were arguably among the most popular and heavily attended events in past years.
The dances, the South High dances were great. Every class would put on a dance. And I know we used to have what they call a ring dance. The ring dance was when the high school rings were issued, they had a dance for that, and all classes were invited.
The years I was here at high school, the dances were huge. That was a place where everyone went on a Friday night.
Unlike today, much of the entertainment at school dances was provided by student DJs and student bands.
But as DJing, we knew what to play, and then you knew what hit the spot, and then everybody just clicked. It was great.
Oh yeah, this jacket was part of what we called the Southern Gents, which was the dance band of South, and we used to play a lot of dances, and we just would dub the Southern Gents after South High School.
Some considered the homecoming festivities to be the highlight of the year.
The big event was homecoming. It definitely was homecoming. I think back in the day, we used to call it Fall Festival King and Queen. I don't even think it was called homecoming then. But that was really pretty exciting.
The prom and junior dinner are generally regarded as milestones in the high school experience, but for very different reasons.
For some reason, I think the junior dinner was an awesome time. I remember everyone on the dance floor having an awesome time at the junior dinner. It was like everyone was best friends. And then the prom, it was like, wait a minute. You grab your date, you go on the other side of the dance floor because you had a little argument with the guy that was your friend hugging you the year before, and now he's on the other side of the dance floor because you're dating his girlfriend now. So I stressed junior dinner was better, and it was a great time. Mr. Call did a great job.
South also has a long history of one-act plays. By scripting, casting, and performing their own plays, students gained insight into the workings of theater and performing arts. The final unveiling of these productions was always an exciting occasion, and a very rewarding one, especially for the individuals who carried away the trophy for best play. But one event stood out above the rest. In a year packed full of events, everything, Every game, every activity, every spectacle paled in comparison to the North-South football game. Simply put, North-South football was Valley Stream's own version of the Civil War.
Could you tell us about the North-South game?
Oh, that was, warfare. We all dressed in red and gray, and we would go over to Fireman's Field and scream our heads off.
The game meant everything to the football team.
I started at guard, and Newsday had picked us to lose that game, 21-0. We ended up going out to that game with a determination to knock North off. That was the whole goal. We won the game 13-0. Well, the school went wild. We had parades in the street.
If you won the North-South game 3 years in a row, you retired the award. And that was the first time in the history, and the only time in history, that any of the teams, North or South, ever won 3 times in a row. So it was a great year.
From the students to the faculty, everyone caught the North-South spirit.
That was the major event of the year, the North-South game, and if you won, everything was fine. Everything else was forgotten. It certainly attracted the most attention as far as audience goes.
Just beating North was our whole season. We could have finished last, but beating North made our season.
As momentous as the events on the football field were, the festivities that surrounded the game were just as memorable.
And it wasn't only the athletic competition that was fun for the North-South game, but it was also the pre-planning, the float parades, the competitions with the different grades, and everybody competing not only internally at South, but then you competed externally, North and South, to see who was the best, who had the best float.
From floats to twirling, decorations to music, the competition took many forms.
And I was a twirler, twirling at the North-South game. And that was on television that year, so that was very special.
We used to have a bonfire the night before the North-South game every year, and floats, a big parade the day of the North-South game. Each class would make a float. It was a competition. A theme, right. They would give out prizes.
Some displays of South spirit would probably be frowned upon today.
There was great rivalry between North and South with people using the flags of the South. Not politically correct today, and that's why you don't see it anymore.
The South would go up to North, and they would hang Northerners from their flagpole, and North would come to South, and they would hang Southerners hanging from the flagpoles.
Cars would be going through, honking horns, guys would be hanging out windows, and the whole deal,
The North-South game left a lasting sense of school pride in many an alumnus.
Go Falcons!
Go Falcons, yes.
Go South!
I remember one time during one, just prior to one North-South football game, North High came over to our school in the middle of the night and took down our flag and put their flag up. And all of a sudden, there were no enemies anymore. Everybody had that, we're going to kill them. We're going to kill them. On that football field, we're going to kill them. We did win that year.
South has witnessed a lot of history in its 50-year lifespan. Certain world events have imprinted themselves on the minds and memories of South alumni and continue to influence the way these individuals view the world today.
When I think of South High School, I think of JFK when he was assassinated, where I was. Like everybody in our grade knows exactly where they were when JFK was assassinated.
Almost everyone can remember where they were on that fateful day.
I was in Mr. Biagioli's class in math, and it's just something I'll never forget.
I think I was in Mr. Benevento's math class.
I remember I was in on the first floor here in the cafeteria, and it was dead silence.
You could hear a pin drop in the halls. Everyone just went home. School was canceled. There was nothing on TV except that, and that was a vivid memory.
And you couldn't, and then of course when it sank in, then you heard the tears and the crying start. But it was a very, very sad affair, and the students kind of banded together, hugged each other.
The 60s was an uncertain time for many, and South was certainly not immune to anxieties of the outside world.
And do you remember air raid drills?
Yes.
Yeah,
duck and cover.
Remember yeah, duck and cover. Go in the hall and cover your head. Right. Turn all the lights out.
I remember standing on line in the lunchroom at some point, and I was told that there was not going to be nuclear war because I believe the Russians had agreed to take the missiles out of Cuba.
You know, it was like the first real shock of life experience of like, oh my God, I have to grow up. This really happened.
With the rise of protest movements in the late 60s, it was all too easy for South students to see differences in terms of black and white. Music teacher Booker Gibson was South's link to the civil rights movement.
I might be the first black male teacher to get a job on Long Island.
Of course, there were civil rights marches and everything else that happened at the time, which kind of, gave a different perspective to students at the time who were exposed to Mr. Gibson.
It's just different. The people are very polite and smile and shake your hand. You don't know that they're really not thinking of giving you a job. And all my friends from college all had teaching positions. And I was as good or better than some of them, most of them. But that goes back to 1956.
Conflict did not just exist abroad, but permeated South's halls as well.
When I was in school, the Vietnam War was going on, and we were all quite worried about the outcome of the Vietnam War. And we also knew people who went to Vietnam and in some cases didn't come back, or they didn't come back the same.
In the hallway, right by the main office, is the plaque of the people who gave their lives for our country, and one of them is Martin Plotkin, who was class of '63, and who I was very friendly with. We even used to play with our toy soldiers together when we were younger, and it was a shock when he was killed.
You had one kid from this school who died, and I guess he died in '68. Nelson, he lived over on South Drive. He got killed over there.
There was a lot of apathy in our class. We were the first class not to have a senior prom. We didn't have, because the North-South games, I know they're a big tradition because I remember reading about it in the Herald, but we used to have the big North-South parade, and we'd have floats, and pretty much all that stuff went away when we were in our senior year, because at that time the feeling was we were going to go to war, and if you didn't go to college, you're going in the army.
Many of South's students were politically active at the time.
After the Kent State students were killed, and we had a bunch of students go out and try and lower the flag. It was like Gladys out there, where the flag is.
Yeah.
Lower the flag to half-mast, and that was almost a real serious incident. We had the whole Vietnam War thing going back then, and anti-war, some people anti-war, some people pro-war, that type of thing.
A student wanted to lower the American flag in protest, and there were twin brothers who were very involved in student council, and I remember one of them stood by that flagpole outside to make sure that the flag was still flying. People were involved or were conscious outside their Valley Stream area about the world. They were socially conscious. They were politically conscious.
In the mid-'80s, the South community joined the rest of the country in experiencing a national tragedy.
The Challenger, because I remember walking through the cafeteria, everyone was so excited about a teacher, first civilian, accompanying these professional engineers, scientists, and astronauts. And it got a lot of press play, a lot of media play. And she was going to teach a lesson from space. What happens, yeah, I remember as I'm walking through the cafeteria, I got word that it exploded, and that was a shock. So I'll never forget that.
I believe I was in the 9th grade and I was going into science class, and they said that the shuttle had exploded over Cape Canaveral. That I remember really being something that we were all pretty quiet about.
Then, in 2001, the nation's pain was once again felt by the South community.
I remember standing out in the hall right after Dr. Lando gave the announcements, the series of announcements that he did, I think it was around third period class, and seeing my AP students, my 11th graders, coming down the hall crying, and as soon as some of those girls saw me, they just rushed over to me and just wanted to be hugged.
I remember seeing the towers on fire because you could see them from the roof, and I did not want to watch anymore, particularly after one fell. I did not want to see another one.
It was really a day that was really tough to try to continue on and show that example to your students that you weren't afraid even though we were all afraid.
Probably the single most unifying moment probably was sitting at lunch that day with everyone inside, because everyone was forced to be inside for lunch that day, and just talking to people and consoling people, and I think that's when South community showed its true strength and when it truly came together.
We truly came together to make sure that everyone in the building was taken care of on that particular day. Staff members volunteered their time, went and worked in the cafeteria to make sure all students were served lunch. The students themselves remained calm.
While history was being made outside this community, South High School was going about its own business, dealing with breaking news on a much more local level.
There are certain days of the week you wish the school would burn down. Well, we were part of the class that almost did burn the school down.
Accounts of the 1977 fire in the senior lounge differed.
They threw a Molotov cocktail into the senior student lounge. Oh, we were so proud of our senior student lounge. We'd worked for it, we'd earned it, we were trying to behave, and then somebody goes and ruins it for us.
Unfortunately, some students broke into the room and started a fire that, before it could be put out, of course, really caught hold in soft furniture and so forth, and burned straight up, right up to the 3rd floor.
It was lit up by a bunch of kids who felt they were being slighted because it was a senior room and they wanted to go in there and they were told not to. But it was a spectacular fire pulling up to it. The whole side of the building was just totally ablaze.
While there was much conjecture surrounding the cause of the blaze, its effects were incontrovertible.
The corner of the school was closed off for a time, so the first floor and the floor above it were completely closed off, and then it was redone as the library, I believe, in that. But yeah, it was pretty extensive damage, and it was scary. It was really scary how close we came to destroying our own little world.
Yeah, there was nothing that had happened before, or frankly since, that was of that degree of damage. It was one of those events that was just so out of the ordinary for South High School, because South students just generally don't behave like that.
I do believe that felony charges were brought against the perpetrators. I think there were 3 of them. I don't remember their names. And I feel like I should apologize for bringing it up, but sometimes the most vivid memory, literally, is not the best one.
Hit songs of the day, popular slang, clothing that defined its era. Over its 50-year history, South has seen plenty of trends and fads. For some alumni, music was the defining movement.
I did like having the radio on. And my dad used to say, how can you do your homework with the radio blasting?
We had a jukebox, if I remember correctly, and I remember vividly the Beatles' Hey Jude and Revolution playing my senior and junior year.
Well, the Beach Boys, of course, were mine, and we all surfed. We used to all go down to the beach and surf, and we were all blonde in Valley Stream South at the time.
Other alumni had a passion for the changing technology.
A lot of the guys were into hot cars, old cars that they would fix up and customize, as we called it, changing the parts and maybe even painting the cars.
The funny thing is, 7th through 10th grade, I remember everyone used to have a Walkman, and it was a tape, it was a cassette. And you used to have headphones hanging off the back of your ears, and everyone used to challenge each other to try to see who had the loudest music and who wouldn't go deaf. And a guy would have a stereo the size of a microwave, and you couldn't fit it in the locker.
The memories of South students are made all the more vivid by the trends of the day.
We were there when the Beatles were just coming into being. We were there before the British invasion. We were there when doo-wop and bobby socks were still the norm. We were there when there was a dress code. That's the difference.
One of the most quintessential signs of the times was evident in the appearance of South students. Many of the fashions of the 50s could be summed up in one word.
Bobby socks, really thick bobby socks.
Bobby socks.
Starting
You had
in
to
the
wear
7th grade,
You
yes.
had to wear about 3 or 4 pairs of socks, and
Bobby
the thicker
socks.
the better.
And crinolines, big poodle skirts like this with lots of crinolines under them.
Certain styles were restricted in the early years of South's history.
The girls were not allowed to wear jeans or slacks. They had to wear skirts or dresses.
When I first started South, you weren't allowed to wear jeans or pants. I think it was when I was in 9th grade, you were allowed to wear nice pants, no jeans. By 11th grade or 12th grade, anything went.
Every single girl wore her hair parted in the middle, hanging down on both sides of her shoulders. And of course the guys wore their hair very long, and they wore the bell-bottom trousers.
In the 70s, the spirit of rebellion characterized the attire of students.
The hippie slob look. We looked horrible, which I notice has made its way back. And I know that I wore a lot of dance skin leotards and wrap skirts, and our jeans were ripped, but even we had the bell bottoms with the extensions in the bottom of the bell. We sewed them ourselves.
The 90s also brought its share of interesting new looks.
In the early 90s, when everyone used to wear the baggy jeans in fluorescent colors. I mean, you had guys walking down the senior hallway wearing honey mustard baggy pants. I swear, this was great. And like a purple shirt, and you with like black shoes.
Right about that time, I think, was like when that grunge phase hit. Some of us were just unaffected, but some guys just ride their skateboards or whatever they do.
You'd be like, this is the worst. So I hope people that are looking back at their yearbooks and seeing those, you're going to be like, where were you? What were you doing?
Throughout the years, many structural and functional changes were made to South's facilities. After the closing in of the courtyard in South's first expansion project, the newly formed space served a variety of purposes.
Everybody used to hang out in the center courtyard. We are the ones, I think our year, we started the green. There was a greenhouse there, and we did a lot of the planting, ecology.
The horticulture club was in there, and there's always silly rumors of what was going on in there, which wasn't true. But the courtyard was locked, so at one time it was like a senior privilege to have access to just hang out in the courtyard, but that went away.
The duck pond. Yeah, we had ducks. And the English department would complain that the ducks made noise while they were trying to teach.
South's interior has also undergone a large number of transformations over time.
The library is on the 1st floor. It used to be on the 3rd floor.
We were planning the major reconstruction that opened up the whole music area, extended the stage here, and some of the other things that happened.
And the band room is now on the first level where it used to be up on the second level. I see you've done that.
I see the stage has been expanded. We didn't have the extension that you have now. We didn't have the lighting you have now.
And a redesign of the library has my fingerprints on it also. And we picked up 2 more classrooms there and have a much better instructional media space while adding classroom capacity to the building. Not to mention the changes to having a running track and an improved facility outside the building as well, and having rooms that are more comfortable with changes to the heating system and improvements to the windows, all new windows in the building as well.
We had nicer lockers. I'm only kidding. We had the long green lockers from like the 50s.
Even some of South's most fabled features are nowhere to be found.
7th grade, they told us there's a bowling alley in the basement and a swimming pool on the roof. I heard it still goes on because all 3 of my kids got that.
Because not all changes are tangible, it becomes difficult to determine exactly what aspects of South change over time. Some alumni marvel at the innocence of their high school experiences.
And the teachers were wonderful. I know they still, at least we do, refer to them as the golden days of South High School. It was wonderful. It's like a family. The teachers looked out for the kids looked out for the teachers. Teachers could drive kids home in those days without having to worry about anything. And it was...
Yeah, and teachers used to come visit, they'd
to
come to your house, they'd have coffee, sit with your parents. It was very friendly. It was very...
And very involved, very interested in everything that you were doing, not just schoolwork, but what was going on outside school. It was terrific.
Back then, all the doors of the schools were open. We can enter at any entrance we wanted to, and wasn't that as secure as things are now. But back then, things were a lot safer.
Others recall a time period when respect for authority was of utmost importance.
We had a sense of responsibility, and we were given a sense of this is your expectation. We didn't defer.
Oh my God, if the teacher said boo, you jumped.
A lot of respect for our elders, a lot of respect for the teachers, a lot of respect for property, which we were brought up with.
But not everyone insists on painting an idealistic portrait of the past. The antics of the students, as innocent as they were by today's standards, are still worthy of mention.
We had clean fun, and we still maintain values.
Fool around, especially ceramics. Throw the clay around when the teacher wasn't looking. Have clay fights. The teacher would be saying something, go to the blackboard, write something, clay all over the place. He'd turn around and it would stop. And everybody would be like this. Things like that are really, really funny.
There has been a marked shift not only in the attitude of South students, but also in that of those faculty members appointed to guide them. The college advisor of the 60s and 70s, for example, was known to focus his attention only on the most promising students in the class.
He favored the obviously bright student. Those who got good grades. If you were what he felt in the 80s and below, he didn't really pay much attention to you. I was told I was not college material, and we all came back at the end of our freshman year. We went back to gloat.
My guidance counselor told me I shouldn't apply to college. I was one of the great underachievers, and now I'm on the advisory commissions at 2 colleges.
There are many who recall a palpable gender bias that existed during this era.
As far as gender biases and gender differences, I personally tested very high in logical and reasonable thinking. And instead of my guidance counselor gearing me towards those types of fields, he actually set me up in secretarial classes.
I became a gym teacher because of the male gym teachers here, because they had no girls' sports. They didn't allow it in 1970, anti-Title IX.
I don't know that I went into the field that I probably should have gone into, because back then in the 60s, girls were expected to be teachers, secretaries, or nurses. And I really would have liked to have been an architect. But back then, girls did not become architects.
Some students prospered despite having been tracked based on their gender.
We had courses we took, stenography and typing, and so at the end of the 12th grade, there were 3 places that the school was affiliated with. And Miss Scientland was so proud of me. I could still see her running into the classroom saying that I got the job, and I was so proud because, you know, getting a job like that at a high school was a big thing.
I think because there were so many closed doors in front of me, I mean, it pushed in me the drive to open those doors. I mean, I remember I took a wood shop class. I was the only female in the class. I wanted to do the things that they pretty much said you can't do. You can't start your own business. You can't play this sport. You can't, and I wanted to.
There have been a number of changes in the students, faculty, and the surrounding community over the years.
It was surprising to see how religiously divided the school was. It was pretty much half Italian, half Jewish at the time.
When I went to school, the school was predominantly Italian and Jewish students there of that kind of background, and it became very diverse by the time I left. And I loved the diversity. Being a language teacher, I thought it was a great thing that happened to the community. It just brought more enthusiasm, more power, more strength to the school.
Another prominent change was in the number of students who attended South from year to year.
We've undergone a change in both size and demographics over my 8 years here.
My class was approximately 100 people, 100 pupils in the class, and it was kind of like a private education almost. Everybody knew each other, and the enrollment was much smaller back then.
You know, the population has, gone up. The average class size I think I've been in is probably around 25 to around 30, but the school population has grown, but it still remains a small community, and I think everybody knows each other, and I think that's special in a community where so many students, over 1,000, yet still be so close to each other.
There were just over 1,000 students in the building. However, predictions were that we would peak at somewhere over 1,300 students in the year 2004-2005, and that was the case.
Though accommodating a larger number of students might be considered an issue today, the current population is nowhere near the largest South has ever seen. Shortly after South's opening, the student body reached a peak.
Well, at one time we had at South, I think the largest population we had was about 2,300, which was more than the school could hold. We were overcrowded at that time. Classes were large, as could be, and extra spaces were made into classrooms.
And while the number of students may have had its ups and downs, most agree that the number of standardized tests these students faced in their years at South has only increased.
I think generally that the children have a much bigger struggle ahead of them now because of the amount of tests that they're given. And I think that's a huge amount of pressure that we didn't have. The only standardized tests we had back then really were, midterms and finals and the SATs. The amount of pressure from the state now to teach for the tests and to do well on these types of tests, I think makes it difficult.
Oh, there's a lot of tests, to say the least. They start Regents testing from 7th grade right through 12th grade, and you have to pass a whole bunch of Regencies in math and science and social studies and English.
The greatest challenge is adjusting to the new standards that have been established by the federal government and through the federal government by the state. The No Child Left Behind Act has truly changed the way that much of education must be approached. On the other hand, it's helped us reinforce the positive ways in which staff members interact with students and deliver instruction.
Along with the proliferation of required state tests has come the introduction and rapid growth of college-level advanced placement courses.
We have, South High School has a lot of kids taking APs, which is college placement exams almost. It kind of helps you substitute. If you take a class in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, it helps you substitute that class for one in college.
We've been able to either maintain or increase our performance on standardized tests and AP examinations. Just this weekend, for instance, there were some statistics that came out that show the number of our seniors that graduate having earned a 3 or more on the AP examination. And it's a number that puts us in very good place within Nassau County, which is itself one of the best places in the country for AP performance.
Advanced placement courses were non-existent in South's first years.
There were no AP classes to start with. The AP classes started to come in, I would say, somewhere in the 70s. We had an AP Bio that Miss Cutting taught, and she did very well with it, and the kids did very well with it. And there were just one or two at that time. There weren't very many.
There are mixed feelings on the benefits and drawbacks of students taking college-level courses while still in high school.
I know it helps in the long run for getting a year of college out of the way, perhaps, if you take enough of them. But I don't know how much pressure it puts on the students.
You know, you really find yourself bogged down, especially the last couple of years in South High School.
If testing requirements have complicated matters for South students, so too, some will argue, has technology.
It was much less complicated, and we still did well. So maybe we should go back to some of the old ways. We did not have computers. We had the old-fashioned typewriter, where you actually had to type without any electric help. But we didn't feel like we were deprived.
Technology now. No, there was no technology then. It was, I don't even know if we
There
had
were typewriters. That was it.
electric typewriters. Did they
No,
we
we
didn't.
didn't.
No,
No,
we didn't have
no.
electric typewriters.
Some believe technology may actually have made today's students' life simpler.
And even the hours that were spent typing papers, most of the papers were handwritten. Because to type paper and then have to stick in this little piece of corrected type to make the changes, and then if you wanted to revise something, it was almost impossible, and you'd make carbon copies. And so I think the technology that's available for the students today makes it tremendously easier for them to learn more and more in depth than we were back then.
Quite a bit of work was required to bring South into the technology age.
The first transition was really building labs. And I think this transition into laptops made possible by, and this was happening as I was leaving, made possible by all of the drops that were put in the classroom. During that planning stage, we knew that we had to put drops into every classroom. Big wiring job. But that was going to make every classroom computer accessible as opposed to having to take classes to computer rooms. We don't have enough classrooms.
From the attitudes to the lockers, from the technology to the tests, most will contend that South bears little resemblance to its 1955 form. Some, however, see a good amount of similarities.
It's changed a lot, and yet it hasn't changed. The teachers are the same teachers with different faces. Everything changes, but it doesn't.
The more things change, the more they remain the same, I guess.
Lunchtime was definitely one of the most important parts of the day for the South family. In years past, South's lunchroom has been likened to a separate world, complete with its own hierarchy of students.
Yeah, everybody had their table in the lunchroom. It's not that there were big rivalries necessarily, but nobody dared sit at someone else's table because I knew that was their table. But we were a tight group. There were about 6 or 8 of us, I guess, at our table.
The seniors would sit together, the juniors would sit together. We didn't have that side that you now have off of the main cafeteria. That was not there.
Some alumni fondly recall the separate dining hall where South once housed its juniors and seniors.
You lived for the day that you could eat in Senjin Hall. That was, the acronym for Senior Junior Hall, the annex. And the excitement was in Senjin Hall, you could get a sandwich or some ice cream.
And I see the senior annex is gone. It used to be where the wrestling room is now. It used to be the senior lunchroom.
The menu differed greatly from year to year, but some students continued to make less than healthy choices.
We bring lunch and throw it in the garbage and buy garbage and eat that, because that's what we did in those days. Devil dogs and Twinkies and a soda for lunch.
They had Twinkies.
Yes, Helene was the Twinkie queen. We used to sit and watch Helene open package after package of Twinkies and down them, and then get up with her size 2 body and walk out of the cafeteria.
I just remember the kids always ate French fries and pizza. French fries and pizza.
They featured pretty much the basic thing every single day, pizza and French fries, and that's what pretty much everyone ate, and was either pizza or French fries.
There is certainly no denying the importance of this midday meal.
I always look forward to that every day. That was one of the highlights of the day. I suppose it still is lunch for many people.
Disappointed with the lunch choices in the school cafeteria, or perhaps just seeking freedom, many South students opted to travel off campus. There were several popular restaurants that became alternatives to standard cafeteria fare.
Right on Mill Road, there was a little luncheonette, which was run by Molly, and I'm trying to think of what her husband's name was. Leo. Molly and Leo. And a lot of us would run up Jedwood Street and go there for lunch.
Molly's Hamburgers, that was the luncheonette on Mill Road. We didn't have a big choice. That was it. Molly's or the school cafeteria.
For lunch, going down to Molly's for an egg salad sandwich because it beat the hell out of the fruit machine, which you don't have anymore, but we had a fruit machine.
Steve's Pizza up on Mill Road used to be a popular place to eat, as well as Julie's, which was right next door. And it was one of the students' parents that owned Julie's. It was a coffee shop.
We'd go around the corner to what was then Steve's Pizza. I think, what is it now? Bella Italia? Something like that. We go to Steve's Pizza. We go to the Taco Bell. A bunch of people would pile in a car, 5, 6 people in a car that really seats 4.
And if you had a car, very often we would go to a place called Shores, which is now where there's a Burger King in Hewlett. But it was like a Nathan's.
Opinions of the school lunch menu differed greatly from person to person, and might help to explain why some students went out for lunch and others stayed in.
What did you eat? Was the food good?
No. Just no and no. The food was horrible.
The lunch menu left plenty to be desired. We clearly were not health conscious.
It was pretty good. It's the best thing that 50 cents could buy. And get change.
They weren't too bad. What can you say? The faculty ate the same thing that the students ate. And if they survived, then I think the students could survive too.
Students spent the hours after classes were over in a wide variety of ways. Those who did not choose to engage in extracurricular or athletic activities had quite a few places at which they chose to spend their time.
There used to be a bowling alley in Valley Stream in Green Acres Shopping Center, right out front actually on Sunrise Highway. And that was a popular place where we all hung out at the Valley Stream Bowl.
Down to Long Beach. A lot of people like to go down to Long Beach. We had a lot of surfers back then, as I think we kind of do now. Back then, boogie boarding was big.
Prime social time also began as soon as athletic and other evening events let out.
Everyone would turn out for the basketball games, and afterwards you'd pile into, this is in high school, you'd pile into a friend's car, and everyone would go to Nathan's in Oceanside. And they had this big room in the back, and you could see the sections of where each school sat by the color jackets. You know, all the red and white jackets were South High, the green and white ones were from North, all the blue and white ones from Hewlett, and it was just a tradition.
Of course, then there was Nathan's, where all the schools met, and there were a lot of rumbles. That's where all the schools, everybody got to meet everybody else.
Going to Jan's after basketball games, and everybody used to order the kitchen sink, which was this huge ice cream.
We used to go to Cookies over in the shopping center.
Cookies, yes.
And we'd get a cherry Coke and a hamburger, and that was our thing.
And some places were right at just about any time.
The Concord Diner was, as soon as somebody had a license, we were having breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the Concord Diner. And the Concord Diner is still owned by the same people, and it's still in the same place at Rockaway Avenue and Sunrise Highway.
And it still is good. So.
And it's still good, and we were absolutely parked there with a cup of coffee, early in the morning, or depending upon when we started. There was a group that would hang there after school as well.
Rounding the bases, pulling up for a jumper, or pinning an opponent, many an alumnus' fondest memories occurred during South athletic events.
I would say my finest memories were part of the soccer team and all the games and championships that we won. I would have to say that one.
Running on a track team, 1966. I finished second in the county in a 2-mile run.
Wow.
Like I said, most of my best memories are playing ball, because a lot of my best friends played ball with me, and we won some big games. It's nice to still be to look in the gym and see the little baseballs in our conference championship, or look in the hallway and see pictures of Mike, Rick, and myself. It's it's something that you're not going to forget no matter what.
It was enjoyable times. Sports were very predominant in the late 60s and early 70s here.
So, we did sports, saw the coaches all the time. That's what governed our lives.
Fond sports memories are not restricted to athletes. Excitement and school spirit came from many successful athletic teams.
Wrestling, soccer was even bigger. Oh, bigger than football.
Yeah, wrestling, football, and soccer. And that kind of defined, I remember it defining everything for me, because I played, but I think it affected everybody else in the school too. Because we were really good teams.
The basketball games were so exciting on Friday nights.
Oh, God.
We would just. I can still remember walking into that gymnasium.
And smelling the sweat.
Well, yes. But the team, I'm just rooting for them.
It just, you were there and you were supporting the team, and it was just the whole thing of being there.
The main thing was basketball and wrestling, and that's where everybody went for their the sporting events, whether it be Friday night or during the week. We had a very good football team and an excellent wrestling team in those days.
In the early 90s, it seemed like athletics was the place to be. Athletics, always superb in the school. Valisham South, I believe, my personal opinion, I remember when we used to always hear about North, Central, South. South always had the best athletics. I remember wrestling, I believe we were champions almost every year I was there. I remember when we used to go to the Rockville Center tournaments or any of the major tournaments, people were like, wow, the Valisham South bracket's up next. And that's where the crowd went. There'd be 4 mats out there, and you'd see a guy from Valisham South wrestling, and that was where everyone's eyes were.
Real big events where baseball was big back then. We had really great wrestling teams. We'd pack the gymnasium for wrestling.
And South Athletics certainly has attracted its share of highly enthusiastic, if eccentric, supporters. The Flying Enchiladas of the 70s is just one example.
It was a group of guys, not misfits, just a little off center of the rest of the world, and they were runners from the track team, and they called themselves the Flying Enchiladas. And they were track guys who ran, but they ended up being like. They go to all the sports and then be cheerleading, and it became very popular for about 3 years. The Flying Enchiladas were a group of guys that were pretty funny.
It is clear that South sports leave a lasting pride in many a graduate.
Athletics have been strong and will always be strong here at Valisham South. And if there's anything that I could do, as even though I'm not living in the neighborhood, to come to a homecoming game or something, I will definitely be here with my girls.
Many of South's graduates point to their coaches as truly influential figures in their lives. Mr. Bill Linkner is certainly among the most memorable.
He was tough, and everybody, was intimidated by Bill Linkner. Once you got to know him, he was really a nice guy. But he really kept our football team and our wrestling team. He really kept it on top, as you can tell by the records of back then.
Bill Linkner was my mentor. I used to run to school every morning. He'd meet me. We would start working out. I'd shower, go to class. We'd work out at lunchtime.
Mr. Linkner reminds me of a drill sergeant in the Marine Academy. He was always in incredible shape. His whole family, his sons were incredible athletes across the board. He was your coach that was always, even if you were losing 13-0, always to be like, you go out there, you got 5 minutes on the clock, and don't make it a shutout.
Bill Linkner. One year, our golf coach, Mr. Hicks, took a sabbatical, and I had Bill Linkner as a football coach, wrestling coach, and golf coach. And I had a haircut, crew cut for the whole year.
Mr. Linkner even found his way into the action.
Bill and I were wrestling at lunchtime, and I had a bloody nose, and Bill had a bloody nose, and we came out of the wrestling room, and Mr. Buddy walked by, and he saw us, and then he turned around and he said, I didn't see this, and he walked the other way.
Coach Joe Argenzio made connections even with those not naturally athletic.
Another teacher who I really loved was Joe Argenzio. He was a phys ed teacher who really cared about the kids. He wasn't there to be macho. He wasn't there to show how tough he was. He really, really cared. And he was the one who got me to play football and wrestle. And I'm the first to admit I was not great at either one of them, but I enjoyed them so much.
Joe Argenzio, he spearheaded a light bulb drive. And everybody got cartons of light bulbs, and you go out and you'd sell them. And $1 at a time, we got the money together and bought the Universal Gym. And it was quite a to-do when they did that.
Joe Argenzio, the longtime gym coach here, he was a great guy. He used to bet us candy bars on who'd win the Yankees game and things like that. It was a lot of fun.
Others credit current coaches Mr. Lance Griffin, Mr. Ward, and Mr. Weish as being their mentors.
It would be hard not to mention something about Lance Griffin, my high school football coach. He was a tremendous influence on me. Helped me grow up a lot in time, and I'm still friends with him to this day.
And now I'm a college baseball coach, and like I said, I owe a lot of that to Coach Ward and Coach Weish. It's it's something that you're not gonna forget, no matter what, no matter where I end up. You're always gonna remember South.
It is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to encapsulate all that can be gained from any 6-year time period, and most definitely such a formative one as high school. Now, in their own words, are the best attempts to do so, by alumni and faculty alike.
It was a pretty pleasant way to grow up. And I think, the education that I received prepared me to do well in college and in life, and for that I'm appreciative.
I think I'm very thankful for the education that we got at South. It was just such a special place. The teachers were so nurturing, and like they said, it was the best experience, better than college. It was incredible.
I had a lot of fun, met a lot of people, the teachers, the music, the sports. Just had a great time.
This was a nice place to grow up. It's a great place to go to school, and it's someplace that hopefully you'll have the good memories about it that I do.
Remembering the stories and the history and the parties and, those kinds of things. It kind of like makes you feel young again.
This was a great school, great memories. I wouldn't change it for the world.
I'm glad I'm here. I'm very glad my kids are here.
And you always enjoy going back to your alma mater.
South is a place that has balance in students' lives. We've had great success academically, and we can build on that. I believe we should aspire to be among the best schools in the county in terms of academic performance. But that's not the only aspiration that we have. We've striven for balance in students' lives.
I had good leadership at the top, and there was very warm, congenial relationships in the department. I enjoyed coming to work. I got tired, but it was still a fun and pleasant place to be. I think that's what really had a lot to do with it.
I've had some great experiences with kids here, and the kids have, for the most part, always been respectful. They even sometimes when I have to be the bad guy, for the most part, I try to communicate to the kids the reason for certain things, and for the most part, the kids accept them, even though they might not agree with them. And overwhelmingly, I have felt respected by the kids. In addition, I think the staff's been wonderful. Its staff has changed quite a bit over the years, but I can tell you that the staff has always been, or kept, I should say, the students as number one.
Working here 33 years, the friendships that I made with teachers, the friendships I have with former students, you can't replace that. It's been an extremely rewarding career. I feel my life is very much fulfilled. And I feel very, very fortunate to have chosen to be a teacher, and very fortunate to have worked here.
The best thing that happens is I go to the reunions of many of the classes from South. In fact, I was to one just last week. And it's at that time that the students come back and say thank you. And that's what you look forward to.
Nobody wanted to leave. I didn't want to graduate. When the time was coming, I knew I'm not coming back here anymore.
It was just so much school spirit and so much being together. It kind of ruined my college experience because high school was just so wonderful and so exciting.
The people I've met, I don't think I can ever forget, the teachers, my friends.
The students were all very wonderful people and very well-mannered, and everybody did their work, and yet we were all able to have a good time. And
I had a good time here. I'm still friends with the people I was close with back then. We still see each other quite often.
I think my favorite thing about South was my friends, and that's why I've been helping to organize reunions for my class for the past 20 years, because it's just great seeing all of them again and not losing them, finding them again and then holding on to them.
Just being with that same group of people,
I miss seeing everybody all the time.
Real family, yeah.
And all of our staff, every single element of our staff,
custodians, our secretaries, the kitchen staff, everyone worked closely with the kids. And the hall aides, security. It was truly a family affair.
We all were like one big happy family. If there's anything, if the genie popped out of a bottle and gave me 3 wishes, my first wish is go back to 7th grade. That'd be my first wish, and that's no lie. Then I'd ask for the $1 million.
The reason we are as tightly knit and as close as we are today is because 40 years ago, unbeknownst to us, we were best friends. We started in kindergarten together, we went through graduation, we started at South together, and we graduated together, and every one of us in one form or another kept in touch. I can't explain it, I can't relive it. I can only be thankful that I was part of it.
It really is an amazing thing that the friendships you make can last decades sometimes. I mean, people do go their separate ways, but I would urge anybody to, try to stay in touch with some of your best friends. I mean, looking through this, it's just, I miss these people. I really do. But, I mean, for me, high school was all about the friendships. I loved my time at South High School. Wonderful memories of it. Wonderful people. And as I said before, I would urge anyone to treasure your high school experience. It's something you're never going to forget. It's going to be with you forever. Make the most of it.
South High School has been so many things to so many different people over the years. Some consider it to be a beacon of knowledge, others a source of lifelong friends. Some see South as a stepping stone to the future, others as a link to the past. Those who have departed South's halls have struck out in every direction imaginable, all with their own set of memories of the days, the months, the years they spent here. Regardless of where life has taken them, however, they all have one common tie. They all remember their alma mater.
Like valiant falcons wheeling. We will rally round our standard.